Hello, guys. Okay, I feel a bit sick, so I'll be drinking water. Is it working? Michał? Okay, let's try this. Nie pracuje. Nie, tak. Okay. Thank you. So, before we even start, I want to say a couple of words about this talk. So, can you please raise your hands, the ones who are excited about React Native, the ones who love React Native, who know it, or I don't know, 1, 2, okay, that's great. Because otherwise I will get a lot of haters after this talk. I'm going to talk about some issues that are exposed to React Native when you're developing it. And I don't want you to think that React Native is bad because of these issues, because most of them appears only because it would be further, but because React Native his own purpose and set of the mobile applications or types of mobile application where he good at, at. But if you take it for a different task that is not really fit in React Native's shape, then you will have all of what we are going to talk about. When I agreed to make this talk, I was a bit frustrated about another issue that appears on my development. I was developing React Native last year. I will talk about the project where it was further, but there was number of issues, and once I just came to our HR to say, screw it, I want to tell everyone how bad React Native is. But when I start thinking about the issues I had, I differentiate them on 4 different types of issues. It's not official, it's only in my head. So first type is the front-end nature of React Native. So we are, most of us, front-enders, and we like to write for mobile. And React Native gives us this opportunity, but it brings the front-end way of developing. And when you bring it to mobile, you have certain number of issues because of that. The second type is what I was talking in the very beginning, is the choose would you like or would not you like use React Native for your current mobile application. And we failed on that. Not failed, but we choose wrong. React Native development process, you cannot the React Native development process has its own errors as well. And native environment. By native environment, I mean Android, iOS, and development related to these platforms. Let's start from the first type and front-end nature of the mobile. And have anyone read articles, watch YouTube videos, or presentations on React Native, like introduction to React Native? Raise hands. Okay, so we are not going to talk about the React Native features itself because it's not about that, but we are going to talk, at least in short, the main features that are exposed to us or introduced to us, like React for mobile development, front-end, style sheets, native components, and one of the most exciting features is that if you miss something in React Native, you can write your own library using the native code and bring it to your project. And it does work, but on the other hand, the front end is based on the open source. And when this open source community comes to React Native, you find out that it's pretty young community, and you don't have enough libraries for your needs, and even if you are having these libraries, they doesn't have alternatives or comparers, or these libraries are not stable enough, or it has like a lot of bugs and community doesn't have time to fix them. And another thing that is not really appearing at first is that actual contributor to the React Native library should or know iOS, Android, and JavaScript to contribute to React Native library, or there should be 3 different people collaborating, Android, iOS, and JavaScript developer to work together. So it's much harder to develop React Native libraries than front-end libraries, where you just like literally doing JavaScript. Sorry. Another thing is that React Native is not in a major version, and often people that requires from us developing on React Native doesn't know that. So actually current React Native's version is 0.59. I checked it yesterday. And they are doing a lot of development. And if you are going to use React Native on productions, that means that React Native will do some updates, and libraries that you are using should update there according to the React Native updates, or they will be outdated. And if you are trying to be up to date with React Native, you sometimes may feel have issues because of the fact that libraries could not update itself after the React Native. That one is about the alternatives for the library that I said previously. And another thing that's mostly valuable for the ones who involved into the estimate project, like project managers, and who are deciding whether they want to do it React Native or not. So when I started, I had a feeling like you take the front-end developer, you like drop him on React Native, and he's like fine. So he's doing thing. But it appears that React Native has like pretty hard learning process. You are faced not the only issues related to the front end, but you consistently facing the issues related to Xcode, which is IDE for the iOS, and Android Studio for Android. And if you don't have experience in mobile development, you're not fine at all. Next type of issues is the choosing the right way to use React Native. And before we start, I want to tell you a bit more about the project, what I was involved in. So basically, it was React Native application for the wristlet on the bottom, which called Eversleep, and you put it on your hand, put this on your finger, and sleep with it. And it analyzes your sleep, doing the oxygen metrics, movement metrics. The React Native application should have snore analyzing, and in the end, it's compiling that in a analysis of your sleep and gives you coaching tips on that, basing on that analysis, and some graphics you can see it on the top, and different analyzation things. The main challenge of that was that client, when they come to us, they already had the application on the Cordova app, and they already had some units sold, and they didn't have any way to update the software on this wristlet. So the requirement was that without changing the software on the wrist, we should make a stable React Native application. So we could not change the flow how we interact with this wrist, And the problem was that Wrist doesn't care whether something is listening to his packets, but every minute during whole night, 8 hours, he just sending packets into the air. And do you get it or you not get it? Like, it doesn't care. So as the result of all this was that application should run all night, like something in the background running on your phone all night, recording sound and recording these packets through the Bluetooth. And that appears that for React Native application, it's pretty complicated to achieve. So first thing, it's long timers. I think you should remember how the JavaScript runtime works. You have certain things like the common language collocations in JavaScript, but such cool features like fetch, set timeout, set interval, some other things, they belong to the so-called browser API. And surprise, but in your phone there is no browser API, and Facebook team had to re-implement all this stuff in order you had that experience like a normal front end. And the timers is one of the weaknesses. So immediately when you run in the timer, like even for 2 minutes, you are getting warning from React Native saying that this feature is not stable, and on Android this can cause some problems. And the result of these problems is that you're not guaranteed execution of your event that is scheduled in your timer. For example, we had 1 hour disconnect. So if you, for example, were in this Wrist and you run your application and just, I don't know, go somewhere, I don't know, if you have a house, you go downstairs and sleep on the couch in front of the TV, our application, one of the requirements was just 1 hour waiting for you to come back to reconnect to the wristlet. But if after 1 hour you didn't do this, it just shut down and closed the application. And there is no way in React Native to do this, like using the timers. So you can just say like set them out 1 hour event, you can do this. These 3 items is actually different, but they are exposing the same idea. You can't or you shouldn't do the heavy things in the background with React Native. Or actually you shouldn't do it like on the mobile because that is how all things in the background are organized on mobile. But when you're front-end developers, you're not really thinking in these terms when you starting to develop. You should know this. So background recording of the sound, background interaction with the Bluetooth, or any heavy background task like analyzing, they may be or may be not shut it down during the execution. So you should be aware of that. Another pretty interesting thing is non-web flows. So basically, let's think how the front end works for us most of the time. Like, for example, interaction with the web server. We create a promise, or if you use like async await, it's like syntax sugar on the promise, but you're creating a promise, then you're waiting for it to be resolved, and then you have your data. In our case, we have a Bluetooth flow which sends the command and it's done. And somewhere on another side, you have event subscription that receives the data as an answer on your command or not answering on your command. It may be some other packet, it may be some data that is coming every minute, or it may be something different, maybe packet from the Bluetooth that's saying that the low battery on the wrist, so you don't even know what data it came. And even sorry. And even there are patterns to resolve all these issues. You should know that it's not that easy. So it's not like updating your state in one action in a Redux thunk, for example. It would be something different for you for example, the estimation on this part should be changed according to this flow. So mobile, it's not front-end in most of the cases. Heavy navigation structure. React Native has two comparing, like big so two libraries about the navigation that are competing with each other. It's React Navigation and React Native Navigation. And both of them have certain issues when you come to think some bigger than just, I don't know, some simple navigation. For example, we had a graphics that should be only in landscape mode, and we wanted to lock the screen of the phone to landscape every time you enter this view. And for example, these navigation things, they are, to speed up your experience, they doing this rendering, which is like component did mount, only once, and then when every time you go back or further to this view, they already doesn't re-render it. And you don't have any event that says like you enter this view. It's really easy, but it doesn't mean that these libraries are bad, but their development time and issues appearing in the GitHub is not enough for them to be stable for some complex things. Another example is there is a navigation tree, like we had different trunks of this tree, and at some point we want to jump from one trunk to another. And even it's possible when you hit back in the navigation, you can rewrite this back and go back on the trunk where you jump at. But if you use the Android like actual button go back, it brings you to another trunk where you jump off. And you know, when you estimate the project and thinking like, okay, navigation would take me 3 days with all views, and you should understand that most of the features sometimes not stable and can bring you another complexity that you are not expect. Let's go to the development process, and you can ask me what the hell is that. So basically, I can read it for you. That is my alias, which says like watchman delete all, then delete the node modules, then clear the cache of the yarn, and then yarn install. So basically, this is the 50% of answers on all your questions, why my project is not compiling, or why something is not working. So even before you have some thoughts on how to resolve one or another issues, do this, and in 50% of cases, you will be fine. And let me tell you a small story. This is a story about how I bought this phone. I bought new phone, and it was like on the newer version than my previous phone on which I also developed. Like it was like 12.1 and 12.2, so you can get the situation just updating your phone. So I bought new phone, and I came to work, and my project didn't compile. Like that time, I didn't notice that it was like the problem in updating. I didn't install anything. I just came in the morning to work and nothing compiled. I start Googling, and it appears, like after 2 minutes, it appears that my newer version on my phone is not working with the Xcode, which is IDE for developing for iOS application, doesn't work with that version of Xcode. And I had to update Xcode, which is like another 2 hours because you download in all Xcode, delete the old one and install it, even if it's done automatically, but you know, it's 2 hours. And it didn't compile. I started Googling, and it appears that this version of Xcode doesn't work with this version of the React Native that is like my application using. it was some bug in Xcode 10.2 with React Native 57.1, something like this. No, 0.57. And now you should know how the updates for React Native is going. You actually, everyone knows what is Git like, right? Git, everyone knows. And everyone knows what is Git difference file. So you actually go into a Git difference file between 57 and 59 and go into all your sources and line by line, copying and pasting the all changes you had, like React Native did from that version to another version. And even there are automatic tools, they are producing the merge conflicts, which brings you back to resolving the same issues. So I did it for the 3 days, and you know what? It didn't compile. It didn't compile because some of the libraries were outdated to the newer version of React Native. And while resolving all this, that brings me to another issue. After that it was compiled, but just think of it for a second. I will read it for you. So copy file by hands. You are going like in your IDE by hands. I use VS Code, so you just go in the project. Node modules, React Native libraries, deprecated color prop types, and copy file deprecated color prop type into the node modules, React Native library style sheet, and then remove word deprecated. Like, this is the resolve solution for your project not compiling after updating to the latest version of React Native. And that means, like, after installing any libraries further in your project, you are literally have to do the same every time by hands. Okay, you can write the script which is doing that for you automatically, like after the install, but still. And let's like summarize a bit. Library linking. How we get used to link the library in the front end. You're doing npm install or yarn add, and you are fine. And for React Native, sometimes it's pretty similar, but you have another command that says React Native link library, and you're doing 2 lines of code. But sometimes you are having something like this. We use this library for, everyone can see, you shouldn't read this, I will just show. We use this library for charts in our application. And this is a step-by-step installation tutorial. Android, done. Yeah, that is, when you think of adding library to your project, you never think you will spend another 2 days on that. Because we were, self-confident enough, and we thought, okay, we add this like from the first try into the existing project. And after 1 day, we created the new React Native project, went through all that process, and only when that worked, we return it back to our project and do like we already understood what we are doing, and we did it. But yeah, that was like pretty exciting. That we already discussed. Non-informative error messages. There is a pretty cool error in iOS for React Native that you're literally having, let me recall, signal 1 sigbrt, and that's all information you have about your error in the project. And when you go Googling, you have something like, oh, I resolved that issue because in one of my files there was extra dash outside of the text component, and that caused my issue. So I spent around 3 days doing the next thing. I went to app.js, comment everything, compile like 7 minutes. Compile. it works, okay? I uncomment couple of lines, compile. Binary search through your project to trying to understand which file caused this issue. And even the issue was pretty stupid, and most of you will say, oh, come on, I'm using linter and I would not do this stupid mistake. The issue was I typed something and my auto import didn't understand what I wrote and just add some crazy import to React.JS in the top, like silently. And I didn't notice that. So, and it was like a couple of days ago. I already committed everything. I checked that everything's working on the Android. And after 2 days, maybe there was weekend, I don't know, like everything screwed up. So when I delete this import, everything like magically work. Signal 1 sigverte. Update issue discussed. Need native developer in some cases. Another feature we had is recording of the sound during the night. You're recording the snoring, analyzing whether there was like algorithm that uses frequency to determine whether it was snore or just car rapidly came near the window. And it appeared that we don't need the library that just recording the sound, which was required in the very beginning when we start developing, but we need the library that will expose to us raw data, like that frequency, 1000 values per second, and we had the algorithm to analyze it in a JS. And we found one which has 20 likes on GitHub, and we didn't have any other alternative. That library worked, but that then we have really bad performance issue that came from there is a magical thing called React Native Bridge, which brings you the native data to your JS, and when you put 1000 values per second in the React Native Bridge, you had like very bad performance, like 700 of megabytes RAM used on the phone, for example. It was just stuck at some point. And we didn't find anything to solve it in JS, and we had to hire 2 guys on iOS and Android that brought that algorithm of snore analyzing into the native part, and we had to send only one value through the React Native bridge, like whether it was snore or not, like true or false. But that requires to us 2 guys who knows Android development and iOS development. No other option. Post yarn install manipulation. One thing I already showed you is deprecated color prototypes, and you can say like, okay, we can automate that. But there is another thing. We had the requirement from the client to do PDF generation on mobile side because they were not very good with the servers and they didn't have developers on the server side, but they needed that feature. And we found a library which doing the PDF from HTML. And that magic library, it was working really good, but it has test project. And in iOS, if you don't know, you should have the developer license to develop actually. You can develop without it, but you can't put your application on the phone without the developer license. And most of the libraries, they are inheriting the license from the parent project, which is and we have license, everything fine. But the developers of this HTML library just, I don't know, they forgot or I don't know why, but it didn't. So after every yarn install, you should go to Xcode and set manually in their menu by clicking. You can't automate it. You should set the developer license for this exactly library. So after each installing library, I already get used to you going to Xcode, changing this license, and you go to deprecated types, changing deprecated types, and it's like building. Everything fine. A small checklist for you. If your project doesn't build, yarn clean, that big clean command that I already showed you. Check Wi-Fi, because your project may not build in because your phone, for example, here we have a guest Wi-Fi and our internal Wi-Fi. So if my phone is on a guest and my laptop on a internal Wi-Fi, my project will not build sometimes. Sometimes it will build, but won't bring the debugging data into my laptop, for example. So check your Wi-Fi on the phone or laptop, and don't forget to restart the app, because it doesn't care if you just change the Wi-Fi. You have to restart build from the beginning. Clean project in Xcode, restart Xcode. That also, like, before you start in fixing something, that's two magical things that, you know, sometimes solving a lot for me. There is a Metro bundler. This is the bundler for React Native. When you type, for example, yarn start in your project, there is another command interface appears that's called Metro bundler. And if you fix something in your code, but didn't restart the Metro bundler, there are cases when, you know, doesn't care. Like, you have to restart me. Debugger, sometimes it may, so there is a debugger in a development tools, like Chrome development tools. You can use debugger from there, but there is a separate debugger for React Native. It's actually mimicking the Chrome developer tools, but as a separate application. It's pretty cool, but sometimes it's caching the applications. And restart my phone. Once I solve my issue just because restarting my phone. And I forgot to put one point here, but I have two types of wires for my Samsung phone, because I'm testing on the Android and iOS. I have two types of wires, and one is from China, and there were cases when project didn't run because, I don't know, I'm not good in wires, but once I change it to the native Samsung wire, everything starts working. So don't forget to have a good wire. I don't know. In native environment issues. Once we were in the middle of the sprint, and my friend sent me an article, and this article said that Google stopped maintaining the Google SDK. You should understand that I was front-end developer. Google SDK, okay, there is one, but why should I care? Google SDK 26 to 28. And that appears that my current version of React Native working on 26, and because of the coming change or like drop of maintaining, I stuck for 3 days investigating how to update React Native and found out that, you know, different files and everything. So sometimes you have to drop everything and just go for an update because of some external issues. Another cool stuff is vendors. For example, let's take battery management, like say safe mode for battery, right? So let's take as example safe mode for battery. Xiaomi, Samsung, Huawei, who else? Meizu, LG. Android gives the implementation of the battery saving mode to the manufacturer, to the vendor. So that may, if you put something into the background and the phone goes in the safety mode, you're not guaranteed. So your application may live 8 hours. Your application may be disposed immediately. Your application may be disposed when Android decides that it will harm the battery with some threshold, for example. So it's actually unpredictable. And the most reliable way is to ask user to not go to safety mode or not do anything on the background at all, for example, because phone may go to the safety mode automatically. Because on the time the library is changing a lot, so maybe now there are solution for this, but Actually, that time there was no library that can say you, am I in a safety mode or not, for example. And sometimes iOS release cool features like we analyzing how many time you spend in that one app or not, or another app, and that may break your application because they're having they are doing the analyzing of your application. And if you put some threshold, for example, I don't want to spend in this application more than 2 hours, and your application running through the all night, it may break your application, and you will you won't know how that happened, because it when operational systems shut down your app, you not get into component did unmount or component will unmount or anything. You will not have a crash report. So if you have online logs like we, you just, your application like receiving packets, everything fine, bam, nothing, like disappear. And you have to have Mac. So if you don't have Mac, you may install the Mac OS on the Windows into the virtual machine, but you know. So you have to have Mac. Another solution here is Expo. I'm not doing introduction to Expo, but in a few words, is a framework on top of React Native that actually solves most of the issues you may have. But in this case, it's like create React app. If you eject it, you can go with React Native, but you lose all Expo features. But if you using Expo, you have only what Expo provides you. So, for example, there is no Bluetooth library on the Expo for now. And that was one of the reasons we didn't choose this. But if Expo didn't do it for you, you can just do RFC and that's it. It's like all your control on Expo. Summary. So, as I said in the beginning, you may feel that React Native is bad, like after all this, but it's not, actually. Sorry. So there is a certain, at least in my head, there is a certain rules or certain ways where the React Native can be really good at. And the first one is, for example, you're a front-end developer and you have cool idea, but you don't have money or time to hire native developers or learn how to do the native development. So React will help you. It's like if you take, for example, Expo, you will not even do the native stuff at all. There is like just pure JavaScript. For the small startup, quick development, and after you have some investitions, you can hire developers or learn. It's already up to you. Another thing is when your application is something like website in the application. For example, let's take Instagram. Downloading photos, just I don't know, I didn't face the chat on the React Native because we not use it, but downloading photos, show them, everything will be working fine on both platforms. You're fine. So if you're not doing some heavy stuff, you're fine. And third one is just my idea, which I want to expose to you. Let's think how the current server front-end approach works. So the heavy stuff done on the server, and the front-end is only showing the things. So if you have a team of native developers and you, front-end developer, it might be a good idea to do kind of front-end on React Native and one big library on the native that will just expose data to you. So you are doing Bluetooth, you are doing sound recording. We didn't do this because we didn't have native developers, and that appears to me like after a couple of months of development how to properly organize this stuff. But in the end, you're having like front end and kind of back end, but inside the native, and your native application will be cross-platform, and you will not face I didn't develop mobile for iOS and Android separately, but I think that styling is not a good thing for for a mobile development. So maybe it's worth spend some time on React Native for styling and showing cool stuff in a native way, but every heavy stuff put on the kind of backend. And yeah, if you have questions, you can write me or ask now.
Okay. We're going to talk about React hooks. Duh. Through the talk, I will try to stay true to the title, and instead of going through the basic stuff, I would like to share some of my experiences and thoughts on approaching React hooks in a project. I've started riding the hooks hype wagon the first day hooks made into the stable release. Worried about our sanity, support from testing libraries, we didn't rewrite existing components. With hooks, we favor hooks when making changes and creating new components, and we are steadily diminishing the number of class components we have in the project because it became apparent for us that the number of lines of code with hooks enabled components is much lower, and so the surface for bugs is smaller. And avoiding bugs is our top priority because we are working on US bank web application, and this is directed to businesses, and we just can't let users for this bad experience. They have to trust into with their banking application. So that's really important. And it is so important because deleted code doesn't have bugs. Doesn't have bugs anymore, and code that never gets written never had any bugs. So this is a good selling point for me and for the entire team to invest time, so clients' money into this learning about hooks on the job. And this is why I like hooks so much. They allow me to delete code, and deleting code is one of the best things I can really actually do to the project that is continuously maintained by 5 developers for last 9 months. So this is a great asset to our stack. And I'm not going to tell you how to use effect hooks to simulate component did mount, how to simulate component will unmount. If you glimpsed through the documentation, you already know that, and passing and you know also that like passing state to use effect dependency array is like sort of like state callback change. You already know that like passing props to the same use effect is sort of like component did update. So I'm not going to talk about that. What I would like to share is a perspective for where hooks made code easier to read, where hooks made the code more resilient and less error prone. So overall, where it makes it just a better code. So here, okay guys, can you see this part of the screen with those boxes? Okay. So what we have here, we have a logout button, and our logout button will consume state. We have a username because we would like to show this username within the logout button. We have some primary color from our team context, and we have some navigate for the router because we will going to navigate to the logout route. And all this is required to like display our logout button. And that's how the hooks version looks like. This is a very basic example, but it shows a 3 basic things. So first of all, the ease of reading the code. My heart and probably your eyes hurt when you just like trying to look at this. It's hard to read, requires switching from top to bottom, and it's only like 3 consumers. It's not like it couldn't happen. It's not exaggerated example. Although you can intuitively say it feels off. The ease of reusing the code, it's after all, it's just one line. And the last point is like sort of an elegance. I pride myself when I can write elegant code. I think this is very elegant compared to what is the alternative. And it also makes code review much easier. You no need to rework half of the indentation in the file to just like introduce a small change. So I would say that you should favor hooks over render props. You also should favor hooks over higher order components, especially in some cases. So encapsulated behavior over configuration of prop that component depends on. So here the logout button that works kind of the same but it's using GraphQL Apollo implementation. So we have this higher order component, GraphQL, that if it's a query, then the data from that query is going to be available under current user. It's here. But just looking at that logout button, you don't know what the current user is. This is an arbitrary name. Like, we use TypeScript, so we have like this additional layer, but you still can like go crazy with naming and do it kind of strange. So here, to understand what's going on in the first line of logout button, you will have to check out the entire module and see what's exported. This is like a dependency injection, but like in the wrong place. So on the right, we see the coherent component where separate concerns doesn't span throughout the entire module. So you just look at the logout button and you kind of know that the current user is something from the query, which is like current user query, and logout is the mutation of logout mutation. This kind of reads easier. The other thing is like you should consider hooks for platform APIs. You will work within the platform, whatever this platform is, whatever third-party library you're using, or you're using like just the web APIs. Hooks for consuming external APIs can abstract away the flow control and the complexity of the implementation. So here is relatively simple example, but it gets tedious if you try to handle in this reactive way we are used to write our components. Use matcher media. Use match media is a hook that will use window match media, and the output of the hook is just an answer whether the current media query you defined at the very beginning is valid or like it's passing or not, and then you can adjust your components accordingly if you can't just do it everything within on CSS. So what's happened here, we have this media query list object, and we will use our state to store the information whether it matches or not. And depends on the query itself, so each time the query will change, we will do a little bit of shuffling here with the media query list. We will set matches, so we will change the state, so the new state can be properly returned from the hook and then reused by the component. Using state here is as important because unlike use ref, use state will cause the re-render, and this is actually the like question we ask on the during the recruitment process, and hardly anyone like gets it right for the first time. People are like, when I ask like what's the difference between like use ref and use state, people kind of like trying to go around the API how to use it, but like no one can really explain it. The major difference is that there's like use ref, it doesn't cause re-render, and you kind of use it to persist stuff just outside of like kind of the React realm when it comes to the rendering flow. And like use state, which causes re-render. And like just this difference allows you to think about hook much easier. Like what will you use to implement use throttle, for example? And I will have this example later on. But this is how we consume the hook. And I like came up with some use theme hook, and depends on whether the given team like prefers like better accessibility. Here is like larger screen. We will keep showing the larger desktop navigation longer than we would use mobile navigation. And the fact that hooks tend to return as a first value the consumable value, the one you care the most about, it allows for really easy composition of hooks. So within the 2 lines, we were able actually to compile quite like something that could result in like spaghetti code with coupled concerns, because why would you create one entity that cares about like accessibility and some mediocre? So this is quite elegant solution to that, like kind of fairly tedious problem. You should also consider using hooks for invariant checks. Let's like pause here. Invariant is like a case that should be always true, and if it gets off, you are going to panic within your application. Or you will come up with some gradual way to like resolve the problem. Often, React itself is throwing invariant errors, and programmers are creating the error boundaries to escape from them. And here, there's a simple use theme hook, and we use this theme context from the very first example. But we would like to make sure that the user is actually provided this context further in the tree of the components, and the context is there for sure. And this is something you can, like, when you decide to consume use theme hook, you don't have to care about it each step. This is a simple example, but instead of like seeing some strange, like we can't, depends, like here I was like using primary, if I remember correctly, yes. So without this invariant check, a user would see like cannot read primary of undefined. Kind of lame error, and here like you can just get yourself an easy error message with a low cost. This is like a different use case. This is something that we try to like get around in many different ways in React, and this is like this no-op operation, which is like updating the state of the component that is already unmounted. So if you write React, you probably came across the situation in which you get a warning in your console, which is like a console log error, that you try to update the state of the component that is already unmounted. And React provides us with this use state hook, and with using useRef, you can track the information whether the component already unmounted and drop from updating the state in such case. So simple solution using the API costs you nothing, like there's no additional barrier to just like using use state safe versus use state. So if I can pride and I can like give credit to the entire idea of hooks, I would say this is like the elegance of consuming them, not especially writing them. And the other takeaway is like measuring before optimizing with hooks. It's not my example. This is an example from Kenzie Dodd's article on use callback and use memo. And it's obvious which code is more performant. Is it? Like, can you like guess which one is more performant? The first example or the second one? So like, let's do quick voting. Like, who thinks that the first code is more performant? Okay, one person. Okay, so who thinks like the second one is more performant? Okay, so and like in between is like didn't resolve yet, or like what's going on. So like there is some imbalance, I would say, but anyway, I think that the answer is clearer if you like look at this, because this is the same as the first, and this one is just like a different right to write this one. So what's happening here is like we using callback, and use callback is this hook that aims to make the code more performant, and this code may look like it's more performant because someone take some action to make it look like it's performant, but actually it's doing more stuff. So I would say that this is premature optimization, and people, when they tend to learn about like how use memo works, and they like learn that, oh, use memo is just like use callback for value, and they like start to using it in the cases that they think there's some computation, they would like to be like more performant code. This is like React prays a lot itself with like performant apps, but this is actually like doing more. So the takeaway is like, before you start optimizing with like use memo and use callback, like go and test it, like how fast your component renders. And why is it slower actually, although it may look like it's faster? The thing is that it's doing this as the first example and something else. So use callback tends to keep returning, this like memoization, it keeps returning the same value if the dependency doesn't change, or it's like an additional dependency that would be used here. If we would use like other variables out of the scope of this hook, we would pass it here, but we don't. So we just use the state of the candidates, and we filter candies, and we filter out candies if it's like the candy. So this is like the code for like removing entry from the array. But filtering arrays is so fast, and like declaring a new function is not an overhead unless like pass it to props, that it's not worth optimizing, and like keep in mind, measure it. And you like, I have a question. Like, let's take a minute, like read through this code, and like who can guess like what doesn't work here? Once again, which value? Yeah, that's like not that like React kind of error. This is with like understanding hooks. This is the problem of like the errors that occurs when people like are new into the idea. So what doesn't work here is this throttle function, because within the each render, what happens here, like although hooks looks a little bit like magic, they're not, and the function is the component render function, that's the search. It will produce a new throttled function each time, and you will end up with as many throttled function that will only use once each time it renders. So it doesn't really achieve the goal of throttling. And instead of relying on this render cycle, you should rely on refs again. I think use ref is kind of underutilized idea, because if you go like for use throttle that is available on npm, like there are like 3 of them, right? Implementation of use throttle on npm, and like tend to use state for this, and like with use ref it's like so much easier to do it. Use ref won't change unless you like set it explicitly. Then we just create a reference for the value here, and we just like keep returning it. And this one, it could be one line if you want to. This could be like one line everything. And with this concept, like keeping this in the back of your head, you will be able to like go through this small hoop and like get your code working. And the last thing I have to say is that be aware of like trying with hooks. This is like developers are sold on like using hooks to increase the reusability of their code, which seems to be complementary to removing duplication, but it comes with potentially great cost, and this cost is an abstraction. And why abstraction is the cost? You tend to hear that abstraction is good. We abstracted something away. There were some complexity, and now it's like hidden. It's just like moving pieces from one basket to another, but doesn't really solve the problem. And it's really hard to get the abstraction right, especially if you decide to write it for the first time. So you might see that, okay, this is some pattern. We're using 3 hooks, and now we like take this very specific code and like put it into another hook, because someone told us that hooks are just the functions, and they sort of are within the context of a React component, but like go and test it outside of the React component, like good luck. The problem is that they are intrinsically connected with like what React is doing within the render. So like just this is like the takeaway, like prefer duplication over the wrong abstraction. Like I know that the dry movement, this is like, oh, like make this code dry, whatever. But like wait till abstracting things into like making your own custom hooks that just are compilation of different hooks you use within a component. Not only because like it's hard to get the abstraction right and make it actually easy to reuse instead of coupled to the component. The other thing is that you will end up with an API that returns like 6 values, because there's like state of the tab, there's like maybe a color of the tab, and like the previous selection, like history. Maybe it keeps the reference to the router because like your tab's now reflecting the state of the URL, and so on and so on. So that's the takeaway. Okay, thanks. That's it.